Suga BTS began his day calmly as he attended a scheduled work commitment in Seoul, where the atmosphere around the building was bustling with media activity and staff preparing the details of the event, while Suga appeared in his usual, simple yet neat casual attire that reflected his understated personality. And in the middle of the gathering, many eyes were drawn to a faint scar visible on his arm when he slightly rolled up his sleeve, a small detail that quickly became a point of discussion among entertainment reporters, who are always attentive to such observations, though Suga himself continued to carry out his tasks without showing any sign of discomfort, even as photographers captured the moment and several journalists started drafting their reports about it. He moved forward with his agenda, attending a short meeting with the production team, formally engaging with staff, and checking some technical aspects of the project he was working on, all of which highlighted his consistent professionalism. Then once the main work was done, he stepped into a modest break room where he sat quietly with a glass of water, taking a moment to catch his breath before preparing for the scheduled photo session organized by the event team. And in that more relaxed setting, a few colleagues noticed how naturally he carried himself without ever making an effort to cover the scar, a gesture that made him appear more genuine, as if to remind everyone that it was simply a part of him, not something that required unnecessary attention, so that his presence that day was not only about the professional duties he fulfilled, but also about subtly communicating that artists too live with ordinary human details in their lives, where their bodies carry signs of everyday experiences. And as the afternoon came to a close with the agenda wrapping up, Suga walked out of the building towards the car waiting for him, still under the gaze of cameras, yet maintaining a calm composure that naturally concluded the day, leaving the impression on the public that he continued to live and work as usual, even as stories about the scar were already circulating widely across entertainment media. In the hours that followed the first appearance of the photographs showing the faint scar on Suga's arm, the conversation surrounding him began to take shape in a more grounded manner, as several media outlets published articles that focused not only on the visual detail itself, but also on the way he carried himself in public with calmness and composure. And as the reports circulated through online platforms, the general tone became less about speculation and more about observing how he responded through his demeanor, which remained steady throughout his schedule, while at the same time, Suga's team kept the workday running normally by organizing a smooth transition from one task to another, including a brief studio visit where he monitored some ongoing musical arrangements and spoke with producers in a professional manner that underscored his dedication to his craft. And while these activities unfolded, journalists outside the circle of his immediate team began framing the narrative in ways that highlighted his resilience in addressing physical marks as part of everyday life without theatrics, reinforcing the idea that he was showing a quiet acceptance of the detail instead of creating distance from it, a stance that many readers appreciated when browsing through lifestyle and entertainment columns later that evening. And during his studio break, he was seen stepping outside briefly to stretch his legs and exchange polite greetings with the few staff in the vicinity, before returning indoors to continue with the scheduled tasks. Moments that were also captured by a few cameras, but portrayed him in a simple and unguarded way, free from dramatic posturing, which added another layer to the coverage, painting him as a figure grounded in ordinary reality despite the intensity of the spotlight. And as the day progressed into early evening, the buzz about the scar naturally blended with updates about his work activities, so that the story circulating in entertainment pages did not isolate the detail as a controversy, but rather integrated it into the broader picture of an artist managing his day, fulfilling commitments, and leaving the studio later in the night with the same steady composure that had defined his presence from morning until the end of his schedule. The following day, the flow of attention around Suga's scar continued, but with a more measured rhythm, as the entertainment media that had first amplified the detail now began to situate it within the broader narrative of his ongoing professional schedule and his interactions with the public. And as the morning unfolded, Suga was seen arriving at a company office in Seoul, where he participated in a planning session for upcoming promotional activities. His attire, once again, casual yet tidy, with an emphasis on comfort. And during his entrance into the building, cameras documented his composed stride and relaxed posture, which served as a subtle reinforcement that he was not distracted by the lingering discussion of the previous day's images. And inside the office, he spent several hours in a conference room reviewing outlines of projects, examining proposed timelines, and providing quiet input that staff noted with attentive gestures, creating an atmosphere that reflected steady work rather than spectacle. While outside, reporters pieced together updates that described him as continuing with his normal activities without deviation, a framing that contributed to a shift in how the public consumed the story, turning it less into a subject of rumor and more into an observation of character, particularly his ability to allow a personal detail to exist without disruption to his professional flow. And by midday, he took a short break where he was photographed walking through a nearby cafe to pick up a beverage, a simple outing that nevertheless added to the narrative that he was at ease with ordinary routines. His scar visible, but no longer the central focus, instead appearing naturally as part of the imagery of a musician managing everyday tasks. And by late afternoon, when he left the office, the coverage leaned toward describing the steady pace of his day, illustrating how the story of his scar had transitioned from a momentary point of attention to an integrated aspect of his public image, one that coexisted with his ongoing creative responsibilities and the grounded demeanor he projected in each appearance. And as evening set in and Suga's schedule shifted once more, the trajectory of the coverage surrounding his scar reached a natural point of calm, where the detail no longer stood alone as a source of commentary, but became a quiet backdrop to the story of an artist moving steadily through his professional life. And on this particular night, he was seen arriving at a rehearsal space where he joined a small team of musicians and technical staff to fine-tune elements of a performance project. His focus directed toward sound adjustments and arrangement refinements, rather than the external narratives that had grown from the previous day. And in the room, he interacted with the team in a composed and professional manner, taking notes, listening attentively, and offering input with the kind of quiet assurance that has long defined his role in collaborative settings. And while outside the rehearsal building, a few photographers waited, yet the images they captured told a simple story of an artist going about his work. The scar on his arm visible in certain frames, but no longer elevated to the centerpiece of discussion, instead appearing naturally as part of his overall presence. And as the rehearsals continued into the night, those who worked with him described a steady rhythm of practice breaks, brief meals shared in the lounge, and moments of laughter that punctuated the otherwise focused atmosphere, all of which further underscored the ordinary human dimension that exists behind the public image. And by the time he departed the building later that night, his day concluded without unnecessary drama, leaving the impression that the conversation about his scar had settled into something less urgent and more reflective, a recognition of how even the most closely watched figures carry marks of personal history within their daily lives. And in that way, the story reached a closing point where media attention aligned with the portrait of Suga as both a global star and an individual grounded in the routines of work, rest, and the acceptance of the details that shape his presence without overshadowing it. Suga's return to a more routine pace of activities the following morning further established how the narrative surrounding his scar had transitioned from being a focal talking point to becoming part of the larger portrayal of his life as a working artist. And as he arrived at the high building in the early hours, he was greeted by staff who quickly guided him inside for a set of internal meetings, his appearance marked once again by understated simplicity that matched the tone of his previous days. And while the media continued to follow his movements, the emphasis in their reporting leaned increasingly toward his consistent professionalism and quiet approach to the spotlight rather than the scar itself. which now appeared in photos only as one of many ordinary details captured during his comings and goings. And within the walls of the company, he engaged in discussions about release schedules and production planning, seated among colleagues in an environment that resembled any other workplace setting, where documents were exchanged, laptops remained open, and notes were made in preparation for upcoming commitments, a scene that highlighted the grounded rhythm of his routine. And when the lunch hour arrived, Suga stepped out with a small group of staff to a nearby restaurant, where diners casually noted his presence, but largely allowed him space to enjoy a meal. And though a few images circulated later online, they were described in the press with a tone of normalcy rather than sensationalism, further showing how the story of his scar had naturally settled into the background of his daily visibility. And the remainder of his day unfolded with studio visits, quiet reviewing of tracks, and a short exercise session at a gym facility adjacent to the company building, all of which reinforced the image of a celebrity who approached his obligations and self-care with the steady composure that had already become a theme in the coverage, concluding another day in which the sky remained visible, yet no longer demanded explanation, existing instead as a subtle reminder of the human dimensions that accompany even the most recognized public figures.